too connected to control. Nothing failed all at once. Systems stayed online. Markets open on time. Institutions followed the rules. And yet, beneath that surface order, something fundamental had changed. The financial system had become so interconnected that no single failure was required to put everything at risk. To understand why connectivity now defines modern instability, we need to look at how integration replaced isolation. Over time, efficiency demanded connection. Banks linked balance sheets. Markets synchronized pricing. Institutions shared funding sources, collateral chains, and risk models. Each connection reduced friction. Each one improved performance. Together, they created a system where distance no longer mattered. At first, this looked like strength. Shocks could be absorbed. Losses could be distributed. Liquidity could move where it was needed. The system felt adaptive, even resilient. Problems in one area rarely stayed contained, but they also rarely appeared catastrophic. Connectivity softened edges, smoothing volatility and reinforcing confidence. But integration changed the nature of risk. When institutions share exposures, diversification weakens. When markets rely on the same signals, behavior aligns. When funding flows through common channels, stress travels faster than response. The system becomes efficient in calm periods and dangerously synchronized in disruption. This shift altered how crises form. Instead of isolated failures, pressure builds across networks. Small disturbances echo outward, amplified by shared dependencies. A tightening in one market affects collateral elsewhere. A downgrade in one institution reshapes risk across portfolios. The system reacts collectively, not independently. Early warnings appeared quietly. Correlations rose during stress instead of falling. Liquidity dried up across assets that once behaved differently. Interventions worked, but required increasing coordination. Each rescue reinforced the idea that the system could handle complexity, while masking how fragile that complexity had become. For regulators and policymakers, control became harder to define. Oversight followed institutions, but risk followed connections. Authority remained fragmented while markets operated as a single organism. Managing one part of the system no longer stabilized the whole. Actions taken in isolation produced unintended consequences elsewhere. For participants inside the system, connectivity felt unavoidable. To disconnect was to fall behind. Competition demanded integration. Safety appeared to come from being part of the network, not separate from it. The system rewarded closeness, even as closeness reduced the margin for error. These opening conditions reveal a paradox at the heart of modern finance. The more connected the system becomes, the harder it is to control. Stability depends not on strength at individual points, but on behavior across the entire network. And when everything is linked, the question is no longer where a crisis will start, but how far it can spread before anyone can slow it down. As connectivity deepened, the system began to behave less like a collection of institutions and more like a single, tightly bound organism. Decisions made in one corner produced reactions elsewhere almost instantly. Funding conditions synchronized. Risk models converged. What once felt like diversification slowly dissolved into alignment. This alignment reshaped behavior. Institutions adjusted strategies based not only on fundamentals, but on expectations of how others would respond. Safety came from moving with the network, not against it. When signals pointed toward caution, everyone leaned the same way. When optimism returned, exposure rose together. The system became self-referential, reacting to its own movement. Shared infrastructure reinforced this pattern. Common clearing mechanisms, collateral chains, and liquidity sources linked balance sheets invisibly. A disruption in one node altered conditions for many others. What looked like redundancy often traced back to the same foundation. Under stress, these shared supports became points of transmission rather than insulation. Markets reflected the shift clearly. Assets that once behaved independently began moving together during uncertainty. Correlations spiked. Hedging strategies failed. Risk that was assumed to be dispersed revealed itself as concentrated across similar assumptions. The system did not fragment, it converged. Policymakers encountered a new dilemma. Intervening to stabilize one segment of the system now required considering effects across the entire network. Liquidity support in one market flowed immediately into others. Rate changes influenced behavior far beyond their intended scope. Control became indirect, delayed, and unpredictable. Efforts to strengthen individual institutions helped, but proved insufficient. Capital buffers absorbed losses locally, yet could not prevent stress from spreading through connections. Stability was no longer a property of balance sheets alone. It depended on how those balance sheets interacted under pressure. Inside firms, awareness grew quietly. Risk was no longer just exposure. It was positioned within the network. Who you depended on mattered as much as what you held. Counterparty analysis expanded beyond creditworthiness to include behavior under stress. The system required mapping, not just measurement, yet the momentum of connectivity continued. Efficiency demanded integration. Scale demanded coordination. Stepping back felt costly and impractical. The network expanded, even as its complexity outpaced understanding. This was a hidden escalation. A system too connected to fail locally, yet too synchronized to remain stable globally. Each link added strength in calm times and fragility in stress. The question was no longer whether connectivity created risk. It was whether a system this intertwined could ever be controlled once collective behavior replaced independent judgment. The conflict emerges when stress tests the network as a whole rather than its individual parts. A shock that would once have been absorbed locally now reverberates through shared channels, triggering responses across markets almost simultaneously. What begins as a contained disturbance becomes a system-wide reaction, not because institutions are weak, but because they are aligned. As pressure builds, institutions look to one another for cues. When one pulls back, others follow. Liquidity retreats in waves, not isolated pockets. Funding tightens everywhere at once. The instinct for self-preservation produces collective retreat, transforming prudence into amplification. The system moves together, fast, coordinated, and unforgiving. Risk management, once designed to protect individual firms, now accelerates contagion. Models calibrated on similar data produce similar signals. Thresholds are crossed simultaneously. Hedging strategies unwind together. What was meant to reduce exposure ends up synchronizing behavior, removing the diversity that once absorbed shocks. Policymakers face a narrowing window. Interventions that would once have stabilized specific markets now ripple unpredictably through the network. Liquidity injections move instantly, inflating some areas while leaving others strained. Attempts to calm one channel ignite movement in another. Control slips not because action is absent, but because influence is diffused. Markets reflect this tension with sudden shifts in correlation. Assets that should offset one another fall together. Safe havens prove temporary. The distinction between local risk and systemic risk blurs. Participants realize that no position is truly insulated when the network itself is under stress. Inside institutions, the realization is unsettling. Strength at the firm level does not guarantee safety at the system level. Resilience depends not just on capital or liquidity, but on the behavior of others connected through invisible ties. Planning for failure becomes exponentially harder when failure is collective rather than isolated. Public confidence erodes quietly, not through panic, but through confusion. The system appears functional, yet unpredictable. Interventions succeed, yet feel temporary. Stability seems present but fragile. The network holds, but only under constant pressure. The conflict reaches its height when the system confronts a simple truth. Connectivity has outpaced control. Coordination has replaced independence. And in a world where everyone moves together, the margin for error disappears. The next step will determine whether the network learns to absorb shock through diversity or continues to amplify it through uniform response. The reckoning arrives when the system finally accepts that connection alone cannot guarantee stability. The network still functions. Payments clear. Markets remain open. Yet the illusion of control fades as participants recognize how easily alignment turns into vulnerability. The system is strong, but only as long as nothing pushes it out of rhythm. In response, the focus shifts from reinforcing links to redesigning behavior. policymakers begin emphasizing diversity over uniformity. Stress tests evolved to examine correlated reactions, not isolated failures. Safeguards are built to slow collective retreat rather than prevent individual loss. The goal becomes absorption, not suppression. Institutions adapt by rethinking dependence. Funding sources are diversified. Counterparty exposure is examined through behavioral lenses. Risk management prioritizes asymmetry, ways to respond differently than the network during stress. Efficiency gives ground to optionality. Resilience is no longer measured by size, but by independence of action. Markets adjust expectations as well. Correlation is treated as risk, not convenience. Liquidity planning assumes fragmentation rather than flow. Strategies are designed to survive periods when coordination breaks down. Stability becomes something actively maintained, not passively assumed. For regulators, control takes on a new meaning. Influence is no longer about directing outcomes, but about shaping incentives that encourage dispersion rather than alignment. The system cannot be commanded from the center. It can only be guided toward behaviors that reduce amplification when uncertainty arrives. Looking back, the lesson of extreme connectivity is not that integration is wrong, but that unexamined integration is dangerous. Networks amplify whatever they carry. In calm periods, they amplify efficiency. In stress, they amplify fear. Control does not come from tightening connections, but from ensuring those connections do not force everyone to move the same way. The future of stability depends on learning how to remain connected without becoming synchronized, on building systems that share information without sharing reflex, and on accepting that resilience in a network world comes not from unity of action, but from diversity of response. Because when everything is connected, the greatest protection is not stronger links, but the freedom to behave differently when it matters most.